Hey guys, All in Crypto here, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another YouTube video. Today we've got a very special guest coming on the show. We've got Mr. John Wood, the CTO of Algorand, here to talk to us a little bit about Algorand and the cryptocurrency market in general. Welcome, John Wood.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm great, thank you. It's a real pleasure to have you on. You're somebody that I've followed for a long time, and I know has a wealth of knowledge in the blockchain space. Could we maybe start with a little bit about yourself? So who are you, John Wood?
Absolutely. But first, I would just like to say, by the way, we are both spectacularly dressed and nearly flawlessly matched together.
This was not on purpose, by the way.
I can neither confirm nor deny that I was asked to dress like this. Yeah, so I'm John Woods. I'm the CTO at the Algorand Foundation. And CTO is Chief Technology Officer. So I am really working with Algorand to try to grow the ecosystem, grow the community, grow the adoption, and I think more fundamentally, grow the awareness of how great Algorand is. And in terms of my background, I studied computer engineering in university. I worked as a software engineer with Ericsson and places like that. And then I guess more recently, over the last kind of decade or so, I've been working professionally in Web3/crypto, where I've done a combination of different things, but tended to be always focused on software architecture and indeed applied cryptography. So before I worked with Algorand, I was the chief architect on Cardano and also led the applied cryptography group there, which is really about building the architecture of these distributed systems, whether it's Cardano or Algorand or otherwise, and also leveraging the cryptography primitives, so the little Lego bricks of cool mathematics from the moon in order to do cool things with distributed systems. And so the cryptography in these systems allows us to make sure they're secure, to spend funds, and to safeguard users. So yeah, that's my background.
Yeah, like I say, you've got a wealth of knowledge, and I certainly followed you from when you were working on Cardano, and now, of course, you're on another one of my favorite blockchains, Algorand. So could you give us a bit of a breakdown of Algorand? So what is Algorand in sort of layman's terms?
Sure, absolutely. So Algorand is a layer one blockchain. And so when I say layer one, it's really at the metal, right? And what I mean by that is when you're running a dApp or an application on Algorand, you're running directly on the protocol itself. So this is not one of these abstracted layer two things that sits above. This is like just like Mac OS or Windows. You're running your app right on the metal. And so, what makes Algorand different? Well, it's layer one and it's proof of stake, similar to Ethereum and similar to Cardano, but it's different in the sense that it gives a user experience that is second to none. And so when you're building these layer one blockchains, effectively, as I've mentioned in other videos, and I'll mention again, I see these as distributed operating systems. And so let me just dive into that just for a sec. You know, when you're running an app, whether it's iMessage or Safari or Chrome or any of the apps that you're used to running on your desktop computer, on your laptop computer, you're running an application right there in front of you, sitting on the computer on your lap. When you're running a dApp or a decentralized application on top of Algorand or one of these other layer one blockchains, yeah, you're running it locally on the computer, but you're also running it in a global context. And so the execution of the correctness of the execution of the application on blockchain is secured by all of the other actors on the network. And so I like to think of these layer one blockchains that run code as just like another operating system, just like Windows, just like Mac, but they're running not just locally in your house, but they're running in a globally secure context. And so Algorand is super fast and it's super cheap. But those things they're great from a user experience point of view when you want to send your funds. Having that finality in 3 seconds, so you can send the recipient receives the funds within 3 seconds. That's great. It's great that you can send that for next to nothing, but that only matters if the blockchain is also secure, robust, and scalable. And what I mean by these three things, you need to make sure that it never goes down, that your funds are never compromised by a breaking consensus, and that it scales well with the applications you want to build. So that if you scale from 10 users to 100,000 users, that they all still have a good experience. And Algorand is engineered in a way that these things are true.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, I've interacted with Algorand, the blockchain. I've sent funds on Algorand. I've also interacted with DeFi, which I found was not only fast, but extremely cheap to do. And this was during the sort of last bull market, you know, sort of blowing off at the end of 2022. Sure. And it's an exciting blockchain. Like you say, it's a layer one. There's lots and lots of things going on, which I'm sure we'll get into with Algorand. But it has achieved. I don't think there's ever been any downtime for Algorand thus far, which, by the way, can be a rarity in the blockchain space, nowadays.
It certainly is a rarity. But, something I'd like to say about this, I love to flex. It is a nice flex to have to say that the blockchain has never been down, because one of those three principles I talked about, the middle one, the robustness, reliability is really important. And so if you turn on your computer and it worked kind of half the time, it wouldn't be a very good computer to have, and you go and buy a new one. And so for these decentralized networks, these like decentralized operating systems like Algorand, they also need to be reliable. And so, I'm not going to dump on some of the other cryptocurrencies out there, but not a lot of them have experienced such high uptime. The thing is, though, I want to be careful with this, because these systems are really hard to engineer. And although I don't work directly on the engineering anymore, because that's what I did at Cardano, here I'm focused on the ecosystem and adoption and speaking to people like you to get the message out. I can tell you from my experience that we can't be sure that Algorand will never have an incident where it has a blip or a bump in the road. But so far, we've had 100% uptime, and we've aimed to build the system in a way that is as robust as possible. So hopefully, Algorand will always be there when you need it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I know you didn't want to mention any other blockchains there, but I think Solana had a 19-hour outage.
Oh, did it? Didn't know.
Over the weekend. I think that was to do with a fork, which actually brings me on to something else that's just popped into my head. I believe Algorand is also forkless as well. Is that correct?
Right. So this is an interesting concept, and I mean, so the short answer is yes. But let me. I think it's important to fundamentally understand what that means, and so it doesn't mean that Algorand could never have a hard fork in the sense that Bitcoin has had when Bitcoin forked with segregated witness, or with Bitcoin Cash, or when Ethereum forked with Ethereum Classic and Ethereum Standard after the DAO hack occurred. It's not to say that Algorand couldn't have one of those types of forks, because they are programmed into the code. There will be a line of code that says on block height X, when we reach block number X in the chain, maybe that's 1 million or 5 million or whatever, split and change the ledger rules. And then so if you have some people who are running the old code and some people who are running the new code, then you will have this natural fork, and that's okay. When we say, by the way, I think that's somewhat a feature. You want to be able to change the rules if you need to. Okay, and this has never happened in the history of Algorand, but technically our engineers could change the rules if the community wanted to. But when we say no forks, we're talking about short forks. So let me talk about that. With Bitcoin and Ethereum and Cardano, you have this notion of a thing called a block height battle. Now, it's in different communities. It's known as different things. I think in Bitcoin they call it like short forks. In Cardano they call it a block height battle. But really, what I'm talking about is you're creating blocks in the blockchain. So you got block 1, block 2, block 3, and you're going along. Everything's cool. Block 4, 5, 6, and then all of a sudden, 2 blocks are minted at the same time. Let's say 2 blocks are mined in Ethereum, or 2 blocks are produced by the block producers, and they're both valid. And so then you have this short fork. So the chain splits from being one chain into this like 2-headed snake. And now for a short time, you have both chains popping along. Some of the network are supporting this chain, some of the network are supporting this chain. Now this happens from time to time. It's okay. It's not an emergency. It's normal, and it always resolves. And the way that it resolves is that after like 4 or 5 blocks, depending on the chain, but after 4, 5, 6 blocks, one of these chains will be a little bit shorter, and so the longest chain is adopted, and then this chain just dies away. And so this is normal, and then we're back to our single chain, and everything's cool. And this probably happens a few times a day. It's also known as a block reorg. Sometimes you might hear that in terminology. What's the problem with this then? And why is it great that Algorand doesn't have these short forks? The answer is, if you're unlucky enough to be on the fork that dies away, your transaction is reverted, and it's just rolled back. So if you have 100 Bitcoin, and you say, if you're lucky enough to have 100 Bitcoin, obviously you wouldn't be working, but if you had 100 Bitcoin and you send one to your mom, and unfortunately, if that transaction was included in one of these short forks and that fork died away, you'll just see that your Bitcoin is returned to your wallet. And you might think, well, that's not a big deal, because you notice that you've got 100 Bitcoin again. You call your mom, you say, sorry, mom, that didn't go through. I'll send it again. You send it again, everything's good. It's okay for the individual user. Where it's not good, and this is where Algorand has the real benefit, is if you're building enterprise-grade applications with tens of thousands of users or even thousands of users, it's a pain in the butt if like people are trading high frequency and all of a sudden you've just unwound like, 50 deals, 100 deals, 1,000 deals. And so then you got to replay all those transactions. And so I can tell you from working on Ethereum professionally and working on Cardano, many applications, many dApps out there, many major DeFi apps will spend a lot of time building middleware or software that glues these things together to check that this transaction processing is done correctly, to manage the nonces, because when you're constructing transactions on Ethereum, you need a nonce to go with the transaction. So you got to keep track of what number the transaction was. And so ultimately, not having to worry about this, where you never have to worry that your transaction is going to be rolled back, means that enterprise-grade applications on Algorand have an experience which is a totally different world to what people are used to in blockchain. And so no forks with a Michelin star experience is our current motto. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioning that Algorand is built almost for enterprise. It's built for everybody, but it fits an enterprise use case very, very well because of these features. And I absolutely love that about Algorand. And you already have enterprise grade partnerships, I believe. Could you maybe mention a few of those?
Yeah, I mean, so we do have major institutions building on Algorand, and some of them, I want to respect their their privacy, but of course, people will know that FIFA chose us to build as the official blockchain partner. But even separate to these organizations, these large companies, and I do think it's good to have these partnerships. But part of me feels like probably the most important thing within cryptocurrencies is to get the grassroots developers. A lot like Linux. If you look at Linux, Linux started as a kind of a project by Linus Torvalds, of course, and he famously said, "Oh, I've had an attempt to build a kernel here. This won't be a big deal." That was his initial check-in, his initial comment on the commit of the code that he checked in to share with the other geeks on the Usenet group or whatever. And of course, it ended up being the operating system that powers the internet, that controls the satellites in space that NASA use, that's running on your wristwatch. I mean, it became Android. It became basically the operating system of the world, and rightly so, by the way, because it's excellent. But the thing about it is that it's more important that we capture that mind share with people than necessarily with corporations, from my point of view. But you're dead right. With Algorand, because of the way we've designed and architected the system, and I wasn't around for that design and architecture, so I don't want to try and take credit for it, but the way the team did, it's built a platform that can give a user experience that is the same as running an application locally on your computer. Things feel live. And so when you have that, you just end up delighting your users. And so I would say that any enterprise grade application, and so when I say that, I mean from the Starbuckses of this world, the Costcos of this world who want to do club points, all the way to a major oil company or bank who want to do something that's very serious for hundreds of thousands of users. Building on Algorand will give them an experience that they'll be happy with, and it's fundamentally because of the design of the system.
Yeah, it's an amazing design. I think I read something recently talking about how Algorand is on the same level of scalability as something like Visa.
Sure. So here's the thing. Again, it's a bit. I don't like to flex on the TPS, right? The transactions per second, because and as I would have said when I was working in Cardano, because Cardano has TPS in the kind of hundreds of transactions a second rather than the thousands. But as I would have said over there, it's more important what you do with a transaction than necessarily how many per second you can get through. And the other thing is, you'll see on some chains, hey, they have 50,000 transactions a second, but if you want to do something that's not just sending payments, if you want to interact with DeFi, all of a sudden it drops by like 80% or something, right?
Yeah, you also have with a lot of chains, they'll advertise 50,000 transactions per second. And it's like, who's using those transactions? You've built a fast blockchain that no one's going to use.
Right. So as I've said on Cardano, and as I will say for Algorand, for me, and this is my personal view, how can I put it? The most important thing is to grow with your user base and to make sure that the capability of the network in terms of TPS, etc., is meeting the demand that's required of it at a given moment in time. Otherwise, having all these extra TPS doesn't really matter. But yes, Algorand is sitting around 7,000 TPS, and in fact, as a cool flex, we did actually see at one point a sustained throughput of about 40,000 TPS in testing. So I'm not going to go out there and say that we have 40,000 TPS right now in mainnet, because I don't think that would hold true. But in testing, we've seen the network's architecture support up to 40,000 TPS. So certainly, let's call it 7, which is where it's at right now. It can do 7 with that 3-second finality or 3.5-second finality, and that's killer good.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly when you compare it to your sort of legacy blockchains, and Algorand, I think, is a legacy blockchain in many regards, but like Bitcoin is still under 10 transactions per second, and Ethereum is 50. Actually, I think Ethereum might be significantly more scalable now, but not massively.
Sure. And the other thing is, I know Cardano and Algorand both talk about being like Gen 3 block or 3rd generation blockchains, I think they kind of say. But of course, this stuff is all software, right? So Bitcoin is software, Ethereum is software. And so software can be upgraded. And so Bitcoin could be a 4th generation blockchain if it wanted to be. It just needs to totally change its architecture. Yeah. The problem is, of course, that is such a radical change to both the software, the security of the protocol, and indeed the social contract with the user. So what people who've bought into it are expecting, that it's not possible to be that nimble and just flip things on their head. But I want to be clear, all blockchains have the ability to change. The software can be changed, and so they can all grow. So yeah, I think we should try to kind of remember that because I do see a lot of people in the community say things like, oh, well, Algorand's newer, but of course, all these chains have the ability to be engineered differently.
Yeah, and often it's not the first that wins. We saw that with the dawn of the internet. And, there's that great sort of video where you start with Yahoo or AOL, and then as over time, your Googles and everything move up there. So the first in technology often isn't always the winner. Sometimes it is. But I think blockchain, there's going to be many, many winners. And I'm certainly rooting for Algorand for some of the things that we've just touched on. It's, I know you say you don't want to flex, but there is many, many things to flex about, I think, with Algorand.
Yeah, I think so too. I think probably the weakest bit is really that we haven't got the message out to enough people. And so, I think when people see how great it is, they're going to think, wow, I want to use this. And so I agree with you as well. I think the future is going to be multi-chain, in the sense that, like, just like you got different vehicle types for the road. It wouldn't be very much fun moving house in a sports car, but it's certainly fun driving in a sports car at the weekend with your wife or your boyfriend or whatever. So, there's different modes for different operations, and I think we're going to see Algorand be a prominent blockchain in the future, certainly in the space of secure, reliable, and scalable blockchain that delivers a user experience that is fit for purpose. Also, yeah. One other thing I'd add is that within the blockchain space, I think more important than anything else is the team that are behind the engineering and the cryptography, because that is the heart of it. That's the beating heart of these platforms, is the engineering. Okay, and so we have some world-class people who are working on this blockchain, as do, by the way, Ethereum, as does Cardano, etc. But I can tell you, if you look at everything in the top 50, not all of the top 50 has world-class people working on it. There's actually very few projects in the top 50 with world-class people on them. I would say fewer than 10. And so when you look at that, I think Algorand is going to see, I hope, a huge influx in interest when people realize just how amazing the team and the technology is.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about with Algorand. I mean, yourself as a world-class person to be working on it. Of course, you've got the founder, Silvio, who I think won a Turing award, which is a big deal in the sort of computer world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's they call it a Nobel Prize for computer engineering or computer science. I like to think of it as an Oscar. It's basically, it's a world level award in the field of the contribution in the field of cryptography. And so, in terms of applied cryptography and cryptographic engineering and cryptographic research, Silvio is up there with some of like the physicists that you would know, like Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein. It's this level of contribution to that field that he's in. And so, if people dug into his papers, because he's very, very well published, if people dug in, you'd see that he's been involved in a plethora of different things, not just the VRF, which is the heart of the consensus algorithm on Algorand, this VRF Lego brick that has really been the cornerstone of some of the security on Algorand, but also things like zero knowledge proofs, things that are used by Zcash and other chains. Silvio was one of the forefathers of that technology. So he's had an enormous contribution to the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Very impressive individual. I mean, you know, when you look at somebody to found a blockchain, he's kind of the person that comes to mind, right? It's kind of a great set of circumstances that Algorand are under. And this is, I don't want to say this is just the beginning for Algorand, because, you know, there's a lot of work being put into it and it's already came so far. But in terms of where Algorand could be going as a blockchain, we don't even know all the weird and wonderful use cases that people are going to come up for with these layer ones.
Sure, totally. And maybe I'll just take this as a quick moment just to mention Algo Kit, which is a project that we're working on at the foundation. And so, you know, we've talked about how great the protocol is, and that's like talking about how great Mac OS is or how great Windows 11 is. I mean, I think anyone using those operating systems will feel that they're modern and they're fun and they're easy to use, and they should get out of the way. I mean, Windows 11 doesn't kind of knock on the screen and say, hey, you're using Windows 11 all the time, right? It just is. It's just the platform that runs stably for you. And so that's where Algorand needs to be as a protocol, out of the way. And so what should be in the user's face is the development journey. And so when you're building applications for Windows or Mac OS, you've got a great experience, whether you're using Microsoft Visual Studio or you're using Xcode for Mac OS, or indeed if you're in Linux and you're using one of the IDEs that's popular over there. You get an environment that expedites your journey, that hurries you along the journey from an idea to releasing that application for end users to use. And so we need to do the same thing for our distributed operating system that is Algorand. And so folks who are maybe non-technical who are listening to this, just to give you a bit of insight, whenever you want to build an application for an operating system, you have to write the code that defines how that thing works, whether it's a video game or something like Microsoft Word. And so we need people to make Algorand a vibrant place to have funds and to have it be a metropolis, a hive of activity. We need developers to come along and build cool apps for Algorand, just like they did for the App Store on the iPhone. And making sure that it's easy for them to do that is the most important thing I think we need to focus on now. So the team and I have been working hard to really improve the developer user experience on Algorand. And so no longer will people be writing low-level code in this unfriendly language that's hard to understand, in an environment that's not conducive to a high-speed workflow. Instead, we're launching this product called Algo Kit. And Algo Kit is it's a holistic, soup to nuts, everything you need to build apps on Algorand. And it tries to make sure that journey from an idea all the way to a release that people are going to use on the mainnet. So the mainnet is the production environment for Algorand. It tries to make sure that journey is easy peasy. And so what is that journey? Well, you design, you build, you test, and you deploy. They tend to be the high level steps. You come up with the idea, you figure out how it's going to work, you go and implement that, you test it, and then you release it. And so we have to make sure that those steps are as easy as possible. And so Algo Kit is something that developers can use. It's a developer product. They will, within one line command, they're going to enter 2 or 3 words, hit enter on their computer, and it'll go and fetch all of the tools that they need. And they will have the tools to visually and intuitively build, test, and deploy. So this is going to be one click. When they write their code, you do one click and you can have it running locally to test whether it works or not. When you're writing the code, you will see that you're now using a higher level language, which is much more easy to understand. It's much closer to English than it is to ones and zeros. And indeed, when you're testing this stuff, we're going to give you the tools that you need to make sure your code is a high quality, but to make sure that testing doesn't take as long as it's historically taken. And so this platform, this framework, I should say, Algo Kit, is going to change how easy it is for developers building an Algorand. And I hope that this change is going to mean that developers are going to be attracted in their droves to come and build an Algorand.
Yeah, I'm excited for that too. I always have this kind of debate. I always get, you know, as somebody that does speculate on the markets, and I don't really want to touch on that, but I always get from my traditional financial friends the kind of question, well, why are these blockchains valuable? What's the intrinsic value of these blockchains? And my answer to them is, well, what's the intrinsic value of Amazon? It's the people that use it. You know, and this kind of idea of Metcalfe's law that actually the blockchains that win, just like with the internet, are the blockchains that are used. And the developer experience is a massive part of that, user experience, which I'm sure we can touch on with the DeFi space and all this other stuff. Could we maybe bring this to the consensus mechanism for Algorand, pure proof of stake?
Yeah, sure.
And how Algorand sort of utilizes this randomness function? Because I've always been under the idea that Algorand's name essentially came from algorithm and randomness. Now, I may be off on that, I'm not sure, but we can talk about that with the consensus.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try to give people a super quick breakdown, and I'm simplifying some of this, but within all blockchains, the secret sauce tends to be, how do we make sure that the blockchain stays intact? How do we make sure that the information in the blockchain is truthful? And so we call, in a general way, we call this the consensus mechanism. We say that Ethereum, Cardano, Bitcoin, Monero, Algorand, they all have different ways of doing consensus. And so a lot of the proof of stake currencies, what they do is they say, hey, why don't we set up these pools, okay? A computer that's run by maybe one person, but loads of us will delegate our funds over there. We'll kind of we'll stick a signpost on the blockchain that points to that pool, and we'll say, hey, I am a person who's delegating to pool A. And so you have a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand of these pools, and then the thousands and thousands of users on the network will pick a pool, and they'll point to the pool, and the pool is responsible for creating the blocks. And so on Cardano, as an example, you have many of these pools, and the pools get chosen randomly. And by the way, Cardano, a little secret here, uses the same VRF that Silvio Micali invented in their consensus algorithm, not in the exact same way, by the way, as we do on Algorand, but they still use the same design and the same Lego, I call it a Lego brick, or cryptographic primitive over on Cardano. Now, it's not a bad system, and it works quite well. If you take Algorand, though, it's pure proof of stake. And so what does this mean? We don't have this notion of pooling together to create blocks on Algorand. So on Algorand, all of the consensus, the consensus mechanism, all of the blocks are produced by individuals on the network. And so that's the pure in the pure proof of stake. It's that we don't have the notion of pools or groups of people that are mining, pool mining, or group producing blocks. Instead, Micali's VRF, this is his one of his most wonderful works. He designed this thing called a VRF, and we'll talk about it a little bit in a moment. And what it did was, it's a technology that allows us to probabilistically, but deterministically, and I'll come back to that in a second, select an entity within the network to create a block and to validate that block and add it to the chain. And so what do I mean by probabilistically, but deterministically? If you have, let's say, 3,000 people who have Algorand, and they all register to be part of consensus. So any one of those 3,000 could be selected to produce, ratify, or validate a block. That's pure proof of stake in action. We don't have any pools. We just have individuals who are contributing towards consensus. Each one of those folks will have a different amount of Algorand, right? They're not all going to have the same balance. The folks that have higher balance will be more likely to be selected, and those with a lower balance will be less likely to be selected, but still, any of them could be selected. For the security of the network, it's really important that we have a way to pick one of these folks. For each step in the block production process, whether it's the initial step of proposing a block, the middle step of the soft vote where we slim down the proposals to one, or the last step where we verify the final block that's going to be added to the chain, we need to be able to pick from these people in a weighted, random way, okay, where we take into account how much algo they have, but we also do it randomly. And we also need, after the fact, the person who was picked to be able to prove that they had the right to be picked. So how can you select someone randomly, do it in a way that respects how much algo they have, and do it in a way that even though it was random, that person can come out and prove to you that they had the right to produce the block. By running this VRF, it's like a lottery system, right? So we run the VRF, it selects someone from the sea of people in consensus. They propose a block. We run it again, and we form a committee to slim down the proposal to a single block, and then we run it again to validate that the block was correct. And it's impossible ahead of time to pick who it's going to be. And this is important from security, because if I knew, okay, it's going to be you next week, I might come around to your house and take all your algo, right? So it's important to make sure that we don't know ahead of time who's going to be producing the block. But after the block is proposed and produced, we can cryptographically show the network that we had the right to do so. And that's the magic of the verifiable random function. And for those who are interested, the way it works is that we have a private key that is used in conjunction with a nonce or a random number. And then out of the VRF function, when you mathematically convolute the private key with the nonce, what you get out is two things. One, a proof, very much like a signature. But the second is this random output, which is indistinguishable from uniform randomness. And that is what we use to select the block proposer and validator. And that's the magic of Silvio's genius.
Yeah, and it certainly is genius. And actually, randomness is such a simplistic sort of idea, yet it offers so much to the sort of security side of things. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I'm loving just listening to you talk about all this stuff. So hopefully the viewers are enjoying this.
And one other thing I'll just say to you is that, like, let me just bring it back separate. Forget about cryptocurrencies. Computers in general are really terrible at producing random numbers. And this is because they're deterministic by nature. And when I say deterministic, if you ask it to do something, they'll usually do it the exact same way and with the exact same amount of time taken every single time. And that's natural, right? You want your computer to be predictable. But what you don't want is random numbers to be predictable. So we've had to come up with all of these crazy mathematics to try to get computers to produce random numbers. And it always involves cryptography of some sort. But yeah, I think what Silvio has produced in the VRF, which is of course used by prominent cryptocurrencies, Algorand and Cardano, is really a work of magic. I'd encourage people as well to go and read the paper if they're ever interested in doing so.
Yeah, we'll leave a link to that in the description. If you could forward that to me, or I can find that on the internet, we'll leave a link to that in the description. So could I ask you then, what excites you right now most about what's happening with Algorand, whether that's the chain, whether it's DeFi, whether it's some of the real world use cases you're seeing, whatever it may be, what excites you the most right now?
So to be completely transparent, it's speaking to people like you. It's getting the message out there. I finally feel, I mean, I'm in this role about eight or 9 months now, so I'm not there that too long, but you know, just coming up on my first year, and I feel like we're finally making huge traction with getting the message out. Because when I arrived, I looked at the protocol and I thought, this is pretty good. There's not a lot to change here. Just in my 9 months here, I guess I finally feel like we're getting the traction in getting the message out. And so when I arrived, I looked at the protocol and thought, you know, there's not a lot to change here. And so that's not the way I felt when I was working necessarily on Ethereum, because back then it was proof of work, and I don't think it was in the right space. Now it's obviously come a lot further. So it was great to have the realization that the fundamental tech was good, but we still need this thing to be people to be aware that this exists. And so I think thanks to people like yourself giving me the time to speak about this, and indeed I had an interview with Binance during the week, and that was interesting as well with Larry over there. We're finally starting to get the message out about how great this thing is. And I'm not saying that people have to leave Ethereum and leave Cardano and never go back. I just want people to be aware that, just like Linux, this is an amazing platform on which to build, and it's there if you want to explore it.
Yeah, absolutely. Could we maybe move on to interoperability? Because I think we both, believe in this kind of interoperable world. You gave a great analogy with, you might not want to move house with a Ferrari, you might want to get a truck. So there's going to be horses for courses. But sure. Have Algorand got a plan to achieve interoperability? We've looked at things like stake proofs and all this kind of stuff. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So stake proofs. Well, first I should just quickly say, blockchains, even as I've mentioned before, it's maybe I'm starting to repeat this line, but I think it's worth getting the message out there. Blockchains are computer applications themselves. The node that hosts the blockchain is effectively a computer app, and it runs on a computer, and that computer has to be connected to the internet, otherwise you wouldn't be able to download the chain. Isn't it funny that these applications that are running on computers connected to the internet don't talk to each other? It just so happens, though, the way they're architected, they don't have a native way, these blockchains, to speak to each other. Yeah, they're running on computers that are connected to the internet, but they don't have this native language they can speak to each other in. They're all little islands. And so when people say interop, just for users out there, what they mean is how can I start on Algorand and maybe move my funds to Bitcoin, or start on Bitcoin and move my funds to Ethereum, or go around in circles? Okay. And so the answer is, you generally speaking, you have to lock funds on one chain and then release them on the other. So it's not like you actually move the funds over, but what you do is you make sure that they're in a way that they can be trusted, that they can't be spent on the first chain, and then you mint tokens on the second chain. And then when you want to go backwards, you destroy the tokens on the second chain and you release the original funds on the first chain. And that's generally how it's done. There are other ways though. The hard piece, what is the hard piece? It's not locking and minting. We do that all the time. It's not burning and releasing. We do that all the time. The hard piece is in the middle. How do you convey that this was done? How do you prove to the second blockchain that this locking has been done? And how vice versa does the second blockchain prove that it's burned the tokens when you want to release back over here? And so there are different ways to do this. And the way that's quite popular, that's used by bridges, we call these technologies that do this, bridges. The way that it's been done traditionally is that there's a network of validators, and they watch both chains. And if they see that act happening on one side and in a designated smart contract, they see the funds are locked, they themselves will check that it's correct. And if it passes the sniff test, they will tell the second blockchain, they'll post a message onto the second blockchain to say, hey, you can release the funds. I've seen them locked on the other side. Sounds good. What's the problem with that? A couple of things. Number one, it's not standardized yet. So different bridges, they all use a different way to do it. And if we didn't have a standard in HTML for websites, you'd need a different browser for each website, right? Or you'd need a different technology for each website. It wouldn't be very good. It's great that we can use our Safari, Firefox, Chrome. We can go to any website. It just works. So that's one thing. Standardization is very important in technologies that are used by many people. The second thing is that it's really those guys in the middle, right? We now have to put our trust in these guys in the middle. And if one of them, or if enough of them, I should say, not one of them, if enough of them is a bad actor, we have the same problem we had before. Maybe they all decide that they're going to rug pull. So they tell you that the funds were locked, but they weren't actually. So they're the two things we have to combat. We think state proofs is one way to do this. And so state proofs are a technology on the Algorand blockchain that is fundamental to the core of the blockchain. A state proof is produced by the blockchain every 256 blocks. And what it does is, it using super cool mathematics from the future, it mathematically and cryptographically attests to the state of the blockchain. So what this can be used for is, in a trustless way with no human involvement, this is purely mathematics and the protocol itself producing these certificates. A second chain like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Cardano, Monero, etc., can retrieve the state proof, validate it using standard mathematical techniques, and they can know with this tiny, succinct proof that funds were locked, or a certain state is the case on Algorand. And so what that lets you do is, it lets you build bridges from Algorand to other cryptocurrencies in a genuinely trustless, mathematically verified way without any human interaction. So this is very cool stuff. Does that make sense?
Unbelievable. Yeah, no, because I've watched many bridges come about. I've seen many of them get exploited.
Sure.
And that's the real thing, with a lot of bridges, you're kind of reintroducing this trust element into the whole process. Whereas what Algorand are trying to do with this sort of state proofs, I think, is, eliminate that trust feature. You've got the blockchain doing what it does, and facilitating these bridges. I mean, that's fantastic. And you said that's one way. Are there any others off the top of your head you're looking at, or?
So there are other attempts to build things
like layer twos or something.
I mean, yeah, you can use layer twos, but I guess more interesting to me is that there are other attempts out there in the ecosystem, the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem, to build things like state proofs on other chains. As an example, Cardano has a technology called Mithril, and it uses a kind of a threshold-based multi-signature scheme to basically try to prove the state of the Cardano chain, which is also very cool. But what I'm really keen to do is try to standardize something in this space. I think state proofs are probably the best example of it technologically, but of course, I have a bias because I work with Algorand. But I genuinely think, if you objectively look at it, for reasons such as it's post-quantum secure, it's very elegant, it uses NIST-approved cryptography. There's many reasons, but I think it's a good standard to form on. But we need some standard, because we can't just keep building bridges with 10 different ways. And if you don't have this standard, then you end up in a situation where you've got competing technologies all over the place, and it becomes a mess, And so And so my absolute priority as a human is to like have the, within the context of bridges, not my absolute priority as a human globally, but my priority in terms of bridges is not necessarily that state proofs win, but that we have a standard. Personally and professionally, I think that state proofs are the answer to this, because I think they're the most elegant implementation I've seen so far.
Wow. And if people want to find out more about this, I'm sure I'm going to be covering it on the channel myself. Where can they go?
Yeah, so we have articles written about state proofs. If you just pop Algorand state proofs into your browser, into Google, you will see we've got written some great articles that are very consumable, by the way, that are not super technical, on our developer site. And so they're there. But, I'm happy as well to jump on another call with you and we can go through this again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll take you up on that offer for sure. Can we move on to DeFi?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Let's chat.
So where are we at with DeFi? Because from an outsider, somebody that obviously doesn't work for Algorand, looking in as somebody that's used DeFi from the early days of Uniswap and all of this great stuff, I kind of feel like I wouldn't say Algorand's lagged other chains, but it's been slower to sort of bring it forward. But now it kind of seems like Algorand's in this period where it's really trying to excel its DeFi space, and that's really interesting to see. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Yeah, I think it's fair, because the just the hard reality is that we didn't really have developer tools that were enabling folks to build on Algorand until quite recently. I mean, it was really 2020 before we had kind of developer tooling that was in place to kind of build these things out. And so really, it's only really been 2021 since, well, actually, I would say it's end of 2021, 2022 that most of the DeFi has been built. And so this is like, last year, so actually, if you look at the TVL, so this the total value locked. I mean, what do I mean by that? I mean, if you look at, if you calculate the value of all DeFi on Algorand, and all the dollar value, add it all up, you'll see we're actually punching well above our weight. And I say that, when I say well above our weight, I mean in terms of how long we've had the tooling there and how long we've given people time to build these things. And so, we have, pretty good organic growth, I would say, in the TVL. I think it's around $200 million or so at the moment. And so that is more than some of the chains in the top 10. So, I think overall we're pushing in the right direction, but we have more work to do. And that's, again, coming back to Algo Kit, coming back to getting this message out. I think if more developers realize how great an experience they can have in DeFi on Algorand, and like you said, the first time I used it was, by the way, when I was interviewing for this job, was the first time that the job I have now, the CTO job, when I was interviewing during that process, I was playing with DeFi, right? Because I wanted to play with the technology I was interviewing with. And I couldn't believe how fast it was. And so if I'm a guy who's been working professionally in cryptocurrency since 2016, has worked on Cardano, worked on Ethereum, the fact that I didn't know about this and how great it was, I mean, I knew Algorand was there, but it means we weren't doing a very good job getting the message out, right? And so none of my peers were really aware either. And so now we're finally getting to the point where people are aware, the tools are better, and I expect, well, I hope there's going to be explosive growth in 2023 and 2024 in terms of the number of DeFi apps and indeed the amount of people building on Algorand.
Yeah, I actually believe so. I've got a very similar experience when I talk to people. They know, they've heard of Algorand, but they don't quite understand it and know what it's capable of. And I think the DeFi space in terms of TVL doubled this year alone.
Which is not bad, given it's been a crappy year in the markets, right? Everyone
of course. Yeah. But but this is the thing, that will turn around. And this is one of the things that I've been watching. When bear markets, I think, are a blessing in many ways, disguised as a curse to many, because, of course, people lose money. But really, it separates the wheat from the chaff, right? You can tell who's building during these time periods, and are they slowing down, or are they sort of ramping it up? And Algorand's done nothing but pursue, regardless of the kind of market. And I think as a space, we're moving from speculation to being used, real world adoption. This is coming, and it's exciting.
Totally. And by the way, and I might finish on this just because I haven't got much more time, but in terms of the growth of Algorand, in the same time period that we've seen, of course, all cryptocurrency prices drop over the last year and a half or whatever, especially through the FTX thing and all that other stuff. We've actually seen the number of downloads of our SDK increase by 5 times. And so it's a 500% increase in downloads, or I think it was like 760% or something like that. But, a multi-100% increase in the number of downloads of the tools. while the price is actually dropping. So I think it says a lot about what we can expect to see over the coming couple of years.
Yeah, it's extremely exciting. John, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to having you back on sometime soon. Ladies and gentlemen, John Wood, I'll leave a link to all where we can find you in the description. It's been a pleasure, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you.